Course 3, Lesson 36, we are multiplying and dividing integers and then also multiplying and dividing terms. So we're going to be talking a lot about our negatives and positives when we're multiplying and dividing, but also looking at square roots, dividing by 0, all of those type of things. So when we look at the rules for multiplying and dividing integers, it's very different than adding and subtracting. Because adding and subtracting, if we have the same sign, we add together numbers and keep the sign. When we have different signs, we subtract the numbers and keep the sign of the bigger absolute value. Now remember that multiplication is just repeated addition. We say 4 times 3 is the same as 4 plus 4 plus 4. Both of these are 12. So if we had negative 4 times 3, we would say that's negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4. So we would say, okay, negative 4 plus a negative 4, that's negative 8, plus another negative 4 is negative 12. So we would write this as negative 4 times 3, and that is the same as negative 12. What we are saying, what we looked at with that is saying that a positive times a negative is a negative. And a negative times a positive is a negative. It doesn't matter what order we do it in because multiplication is commutative. So remember that if we have this pattern of, okay, negative 5 times 3 is negative 15, times 2 is negative 10, times 1 is negative 5, times 0 is 0. Now if we go into the negatives, negative 5 times negative 1, we get 5. And times negative 2 is 10. We can see this pattern and kind of prove it to ourselves that we have these certain rules. And we would say that our rules are a negative times a negative is a positive. That's what we proved on the other page by seeing those patterns. So these are all of our rules for multiplication and division. If we have the same sign multiplied or divided, we get a positive number. If we have different signs, multiplied or divided, we get a negative number. So, just to check, if we did negative 8 divided by 2, we would say that is negative 4. Negative 20 divided by negative 10 is 2, because we have a negative divided by negative. 12 divided by negative 3 is definitely going to be negative, and that's going to be negative 4. 27 divided by 9, well, that's for sure going to be positive 3. And lastly, a negative divided by negative is going to be positive, and 8 divided by 1 is 8. So, now if we are looking at dividing or multiplying by 0, we know that any number times 0 is 0. But any integer divided by 0 is undefined. So, some examples of this, we could say, well, what if I had 3 divided by 0? Well, what we're saying here, that is undefined. But if I had 0 divided by 3, we would say that's just 0. The difference here is, the first example, we're saying, okay, I have 3 cookies, and I'm going to split those into 0 different boxes. But I can't put 3 cookies in 0 boxes. They're not just going to go away. So I would say that's not possible. But if I had 0 cookies and put them in 3 boxes, well, there would be 0 cookies in each box. So that's fine. A way to remember this is by putting letters where you saw those 3's. We would say it is okay to take a 0 and divide it by a number, but it is a big no-no to take a number and divide by 0. Okay, so it's okay to take 0, divide by a number, but it's not okay to divide by 0. Okay, so here are some other practice problems to try on your own. Now let's look at these situations, because although these look like a set of numbers that are the same on this page, they're quite different. When we have the parentheses around negative 1 to the 5th power, what this is saying is I'm going to take negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 and 1 more negative 1. And if I do that, I'm going to get, okay, negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1. Okay, and I have another positive 1 right here times a negative 1. Okay, so I get a negative 1. But if we go down to the one beneath it, we don't have any parentheses. What this is actually saying is that I am going to take negative 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. The 1, not a negative 1, is being multiplied by itself. 1 is to the 5th power, not negative 1 to the 5th power. Because there are no parentheses, I am just saying that 1 is to the 5th power, not negative 1. So I still get a negative 1 in this case. But when we get to the right side, we see some big differences. So if we take negative 1 times itself 6 times, okay, well, then we see, okay, this pair is going to give me a positive 1, this pair is going to give me a positive 1, and so is this one, which means that overall I get a positive 1. But if I do the same, like I saw, I have 1 times itself 6 times, well, I would get a 1 on the inside, and that negative on the outside tells me that I get a negative 1. It's very, very different. So be sure you know if we should have parentheses or not. When you see those parentheses, remember that entire number inside is getting multiplied by itself. Whereas if we don't have parentheses, just the number, not the negative, is being multiplied by itself. So if I get to an equation like this, the question is, well, which one do I have? Do I have y equals negative 4 squared, or do I have y equals negative 4 squared without parentheses? So the question is all of x being squared, or is it just the number, not the negative? And you would say, well, of course all of x is being squared, so we need all of that value being squared, which means we are looking at our parentheses, which means we have negative 4 times negative 4, so y equals 16. This is not what we're talking about. We need to make sure the entire number is being squared. All right? On another note, if we have x squared equaling 64, what two numbers can equal for x? And we would say, well, something times something equals 64. And a really normal one to say is 8. But we actually have a second one. It can be negative 8 as well. Okay, this is where some confusion can lie. Just know that if we take the square root of each side so that we can get x alone, we have an equation here, which means we can have two answers. Whereas if I just walked up to you on the street and says, what's the square root of 64? You would say it's 8. That is an expression that has just one answer, okay? This is just the primary square root, so it's asking for the positive answer, not the negative one as well, okay? Because this just has one value, okay? It's just 8. So let's look at some other examples and simplify some things here. All right, well, if we are simplifying, remember, I'm going to multiply together things that are similar, okay, have similar variables or numbers. So I can multiply together the x or the 6 and the negative 2 to get negative 12. I can multiply the x squared and the x to get x to the third, the y and the y to get y squared, and I can multiply by z. Now when I divide, I'm going to look very similarly. I'm going to look at my 6 divided by negative 2, which is negative 3, x squared divided by x, which is just an x in the numerator, y divided by y, well, that's 1, so they actually go away, and then I have z left in my denominator. So go variable by variable, simplifying. Okay, a couple more examples here. So I'm going to take this entire 3x and multiply it out to say, okay, 3x times 2x is 6x squared. 3x times negative 4 is a negative 12x. And on the bottom here, I'm going to do a negative 3x times a 2x, so I get negative 6x squared. And a negative 3x times a negative 4, well, negative times a negative is a positive 12x. So it makes a difference having that negative outside versus not. Alright, I'll just do these really quick. We expand and we get 4x squared minus 10x. Okay, remember to stop the video if you want to try these before I get to them. And negative 4x squared plus 10x. And on this left side, we can multiply negative 12 and 3 to get negative 36, x squared and x to get x to the third, y and y to get y squared, and z is by itself. And then we're going to divide negative 12 and 3, so negative 4, x squared and x to get x, y and y go away, and we have z. And this one stays in the numerator. Well, I hope this was helpful for your homework and for studying.